This is not what we discussed. You need to follow the plan. This is unacceptable. I told you to finish it by yesterday.
In this gripping, emotionally charged tale, Jamal, a skilled black construction worker, faces relentless humiliation and systemic racism from arrogant engineers led by Ethan, who mock his intelligence, push him into unsafe tasks, and demean him in front of the entire crew. Despite public mockery and private threats, Jamal silently endures, finding moments of solace with sympathetic co-workers like Luis. As tensions escalate, Jamal reaches his breaking point, refusing to risk his life for their entertainment, exposing Ethan's cruelty before witnesses and challenging the silence that protected the abusers. The systemic corruption extends to higher management, who observe but fail to intervene, highlighting the widespread betrayal and abuse of power. Gradually, Ethan and his team lose control as the laborers unite in quiet solidarity, whispers of truth spreading throughout the site. Ultimately, HR intervenes with irrefutable evidence, leading to the engineer's public downfall and suspension, while Jamal achieves poetic justice. In the aftermath, he reflects on the lessons of courage, resilience, and dignity, leaving a lasting impression on the workers and demonstrating that standing up against oppression can dismantle even the most entrenched systems of power. The construction site roared to life before sunrise. Heavy machines rumbled like restless beasts. Cranes swayed against the gray sky, and the air carried the sharp tang of iron and dust. Workers filed in with lunchboxes, helmets slung low, boots scuffing the gravel. Among them was Jamal Carter, quiet, steady, and carrying the weight of a man who had endured this routine 100 times before. Morning. Jamal, the fellow laborer mumbled, eyes down, as if afraid to be seen speaking too warmly. Jamal nodded. Morning. His voice was low even, never inviting trouble. From the trailer above the site, a cluster of engineers stepped out in crisp uniforms, helmets spotless, boots untouched by mud. Their laughter was loud, intentional, the kind that demanded attention. At the center was Ethan Brooks, the lead engineer, tall and sharp-featured with a smirk that seemed permanent. Ethan's eyes landed on Jamal. He leaned toward his colleagues. "Watch this," he muttered. "Carter." Ethan's voice sliced through the noise. Jamal straightened.
"Yes, sir?"
"Didn't expect you'd show up this early. Thought you folks liked flexible hours." Ethan chuckled, and the engineers beside him followed suit. A ripple of uneasy silence spread across the crew. No one laughed, yet no one objected. Jamal's jaw tightened. He forced a calm reply. "I'm here same as everyone. On time. Good, good." Ethan waved him off like a child. "Let's see if you can keep up today." The other engineers whispered and smirked. Jamal turned away, gripping his gloves tighter. His chest burned, but he kept his face neutral. Around him, men avoided his eyes. They buried themselves in tasks, unwilling to be drawn into conflict. That silence, heavier than the machines, was the sound of complicity. During the morning briefing, Ethan barked orders. "Smith Torres, you're with me." "Carter, yeah, you, grab the rebar and set it up along the trench. Alone." A laborer spoke up timidly. "That's usually a two-man job." Ethan shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "Did I ask for a lecture?" "Carter can handle it." All eyes fell on Jamal again. He swallowed hard and nodded. "I'll get it done. See?" Ethan smirked. Man's eager. That's the spirit. The crew dispersed, whispers trailing like smoke. Jamal bent down, fingers brushing the cold steel rods. His muscles strained as he lifted, veins bulging under the weight. The laughter of the engineers echoed in the background. One whispered loud enough to carry, "Bet he thinks he's proving something." Another chuckled. "Let him. Cheaper than hiring two guys." Jamal heard every word. He kept working. Sweat poured down his forehead, dust sticking to his skin. His silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. Hours later, during the break, Jamal sat alone on a concrete block. He unwrapped his sandwich slowly, staring at the ground. Around him, groups gathered in circles of laughter and easy talk, but no one crossed to sit beside him. "Not today." From the shade, Ethan's voice rang again. "You holding up there, Carter? Don't want you collapsing. Wouldn't look good on my report." The group of engineers burst out laughing. Jamal looked up, eyes steady, voice calm. "I'll manage," Ethan smirked. "We'll see." The break ended, but the tension didn't. Everyone returned to work, machines growling back to life. Jamal stood, dusted himself off, and walked back to the trench. The day was far from over, and already the weight pressing on him felt heavier than the steel in his hands. By mid-morning, the sun had burned through the haze, pouring relentless heat across the site. Dust clung to every breath, and the clatter of steel echoed like gunfire. Jamal hauled another bundle of rebar toward the trench, muscles aching. His shirt was dark with sweat. From the scaffolding above, Ethan and his group watched with smug amusement. "Look at him go," one engineer muttered. "Beast of burden, huh?" Ethan smirked. "Don't insult the animals. At least they know when to stop." Laughter drifted down like debris. Jamal's hands clenched the steel tighter. He said nothing. Later, while marking measurements, Jamal crouched near the trench. Ethan strolled over, clipboard in hand, voice dripping with false cheer. "Carter, quick test for you." Jamal looked up. "Yes, sir?" Ethan pointed at the blueprint. "What's the angle of this crossbeam joint?" Jamal hesitated, scanning the paper. He knew the answer. He'd seen enough over the years to read simple layouts, but the question wasn't about work. It was bait. 45 degrees, Jamal said firmly. The engineers exchanged glances. Ethan raised his brows in mock surprise. Well, guess you can read. Congratulations, Carter. Didn't think geometry was in your skill set." More laughter. One man actually clapped. Jamal straightened slowly, eyes steady. "I've been doing this a while." "Oh, I'm sure you have," Ethan said with a smirk. "But experience doesn't equal intelligence. Don't get too comfortable." The words sliced sharper than steel. Jamal's throat tightened, but he forced himself to nod and return to his work. During the afternoon, another trap was set. "Carter," Ethan barked. "Need you to carry those steel plates to the scaffold." Jamal glanced at the stack. Thick slabs, each heavier than safety regulations allowed for a single man. Normally 2 workers would handle them. "That's a 2-man job, sir," Jamal said carefully. "Is it?" Ethan tilted his head. "Or are you saying you're not strong enough?" The other engineers smirked, waiting. Jamal's chest heaved once. Then he stepped forward, gripping a plate. His arms trembled under the load, but he lifted it, dragging it toward the scaffold. The crew watched silently, shame painted across their faces. One worker whispered to another, "He shouldn't be doing that alone." "Shh," the other hissed. "You want to be next?" Jamal staggered, dropped the plate into place, and straightened, sweat pouring down his temple. Ethan gave a slow clap. "Impressive. Guess you've got your uses after all." The words weren't praise. They were a leash. Later still, as the men gathered for water, one engineer, Miller, leaned close to Ethan, speaking loud enough for Jamal to hear. "Think he even understands the safety briefings? Or does someone translate for him?" Ethan chuckled. "Don't worry. He follows orders, like a good soldier." Jamal's hand froze on his water bottle. His jaw flexed, but he kept silent. A laborer nearby muttered under his breath, "This ain't right." Ethan's sharp gaze pinned him. "Something to say?" The man shook his head quickly. "No, sir." "That's what I thought." Ethan turned back to Jamal with a smirk. "Drink up. Long day ahead." Evening shadows stretched long across the site. Jamal dragged himself toward the tool shed, body aching but spirit unbroken. A voice stopped him. "Hey." It was Luis, one of the older workers, standing by the fence. His eyes carried sympathy but also fear. "You okay?" Luis asked softly. Jamal nodded once. "I'll be fine." Luis glanced over his shoulder to make sure no one listened. "You don't deserve this, brother. But don't fight it. They'll eat you alive if you do." Jamal looked at him, weary but steady. "If I don't fight, they still eat me alive." "Just slower." The words hung heavy in the air. Luis swallowed hard, unable to respond. Jamal turned, walking into the fading light. His silence was not surrender. It was the sound of a storm gathering strength. By the 3rd day of the week, the tension on site was thick enough to choke. Everyone knew the engineers had made Jamal their target. Everyone knew it could only escalate. The air was electric with expectation, but no one said a word. At the morning briefing, Ethan stood on the platform, clipboard in hand, surrounded by his crew of engineers. His smirk was sharper than usual, his tone dripping with mockery disguised as authority. "All right, gentlemen," Ethan announced, loud enough for all laborers to hear. "Today we're going to test some competence." He let the word hang. His eyes slid toward Jamal. "Carter!" "Step forward." The crowd shifted uneasily. Jamal's boots scraped against gravel as he walked to the front, shoulders squared, face calm. Yes, sir. Ethan grinned like a wolf. Tell me, Carter, how long have you been on sites like this? Jamal replied evenly. Over 10 years. 10 years? Ethan raised his brows in mock amazement. Wow, and here I was thinking you just carried bags or swept floors. Laughter erupted from the engineers. Some workers chuckled nervously out of fear, not amusement. Jamal's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. I've done the work. All of it. Oh, I don't doubt it, Ethan sneered. Muscle work, sure. But brain work? Doubtful. He snapped his fingers. An assistant handed him a blueprint. Ethan held it high. All right, Carter. Let's give the crew a show. Read this. He shoved the paper into Jamal's hands. Jamal scanned it quickly. Layout of crossbeams, load-bearing specs. His eyes narrowed, reading with practiced focus. Column reinforcement spacing. 12 inches. Ethan leaned in. Say that again. Spacing is 12 inches, Jamal repeated. The smirk faltered for half a second. Then Ethan barked a laugh. Well, what do you know? He can read numbers. Did someone tutor you? The engineers roared. Jamal folded the paper slowly, handed it back. His voice low. I just know my work. Oh, you know your work, Ethan mocked. Then why don't you demonstrate? Show us how you tie rebar the proper way. Right here. In front of everyone, Jamal hesitated. The demand wasn't about skill, it was about humiliation. Still, he knelt, gloves pulling steel tight. His hands moved with efficiency, years of practice flowing into muscle memory. In minutes, the tie was done, neat and secure. The workers nodded silently among themselves. The engineers, though, exchanged disappointed looks. Jamal hadn't failed. Ethan clicked his tongue. Not bad for your kind. The words dropped like lead. A gasp rippled through the crew. One worker muttered, That's too far. But his voice was swallowed by silence. Jamal froze, the steel still clutched in his hands. Heat crawled up his neck, but he did not rise to the bait. Ethan smirked wider, sensing weakness. Come on, don't get shy. We're all friends here. Or do you think you're equal to us? The silence was suffocating. All eyes were on Jamal. Slowly he stood. His voice was calm, quiet, but heavy. I think I'm a man. Same as anyone here. The crew shifted uncomfortably. Ethan laughed loud and cruel. A man? Sure, but let's be honest, you'll never be more than what you are. Strong back, silent mouth. That's your role. Nothing higher. His words echoed across the site. The other engineers laughed openly, one even miming a whipping motion with his belt. The humiliation was complete. Jamal stood there, fists clenched at his sides, every muscle screaming to react, but he didn't. Instead, he turned, walked slowly back into the crowd, not defeated but heavy with something stronger than anger. Resolve. That evening, in the locker shed, whispers spread like fire. Did you hear what he said? Unbelievable. In front of everyone. Why didn't anyone stop it? Because nobody wants to lose their job, that's why. The chatter died as Jamal entered, face unreadable. No one spoke. Some looked away in shame. Luis, the older worker, finally muttered, You all right, brother? Jamal paused, staring at the dusty floor. Then he looked up, eyes steady, voice low but cutting. They think silence is safety, but silence is chains. The men glanced at each other, uneasy. None replied. Jamal sat down quietly, lacing his boots with calm precision. The storm inside him no longer hid. It was growing, waiting for the moment to strike. The construction site emptied as dusk painted the sky in rust and gray. Machines powered down one by one, leaving only the creak of cooling metal and the whisper of wind carrying dust across the gravel. Jamal lingered, sitting alone on the edge of a concrete block. His helmet rested at his side, his hands rubbed raw from the day's labor. The silence pressed heavy on his chest, heavier than the steel he had carried. Footsteps approached, slow and cautious. It was Luis, the older worker who'd shown him kindness before. His uniform was worn, his boots caked in years of mud. In his hand he carried a mop handle. He'd stayed late to clean the trailer floors. You didn't head home, Luis said softly. Jamal didn't look up, not ready to. Luis set the mop aside, easing down beside him. For a moment they sat in silence, the last orange light slipping away behind the cranes. Finally Jamal spoke, his voice cracked low, rough. Do you know what it feels like, Luis? To be laughed at for existing? To have every word, every look remind you that you don't belong? Luis's face tightened. I know some of it. Not the same as you. But I've seen it, felt pieces of it. Jamal's hands curled into fists. Today he called me less than a man. Said I'd never be more than a back to carry their weight. His voice trembled, but his eyes burned. I've worked for 10 years on sites like this. 10 years breaking my body to prove I'm worth the pay. And still, I'm just a joke to them. Luis hesitated, then placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. You don't need their approval. You know who you are. Jamal shook his head, bitterness sharp. But every laugh, every silence, it cuts. It tells me I'm alone. And the worst part? Everyone else knows it's wrong, but they're too scared to say a word. They hide behind silence. Luis sighed heavily. Silence is survival, Jamal. You stand up, they bury you. Jamal looked at him, eyes fierce. If I don't stand up, I'm already buried. Just slower. The words hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Luis rubbed his hands together, restless. You've got fire in you. But fire burns, and here? Fire gets stomped out fast, Jamal's jaw clenched. His voice dropped to a whisper. Maybe, but I can't keep swallowing this. Every day I bite my tongue, every day I carry their insults. It's killing me from the inside. Luis stared at him, troubled. So what are you gonna do? Jamal exhaled shakily, staring at the shadow of the crane stretching across the ground like iron bars. I don't know, but I can't stay silent much longer. Something's going to break. They sat in silence, listening to the night settle over the site. Crickets sang faintly beyond the fences. A distant car horn echoed. Finally, Luis stood, picking up his mop. Be careful, brother. I mean it, men like Ethan. They think they're untouchable. Push the wrong way and they'll crush you without a thought. Jamal rose slowly, picking up his helmet. His voice was calm, almost steady again. Men who think they're untouchable always forget one thing. Luis frowned. What's that? Jamal's gaze was fixed on the horizon. Where the last ember of daylight flickered, they bleed like anyone else. That night, Jamal walked home through the dim streets, the weight of his day pressing down on him. Yet under the weight was something else, an ember, small but growing. His breaking point was not defeat. It was the spark of something larger, something inevitable. The storm was no longer contained. The next morning, the site buzzed under a sky of washed-out blue. Workers clocked in, the smell of diesel thick in the air. Jamal arrived early, as always, his steps steady despite the storm brewing inside him. From the elevated trailer, a new figure appeared. Mr. Daniels, the project manager. Clean suit under a reflective vest, polished shoes and a clipboard tucked under his arm. He wasn't often seen on site. His presence meant eyes were watching from above. Morning, crew, Daniels said mildly as he surveyed the operation. His voice carried authority even when soft. Ethan quickly strode up to him, all charm and confidence. Mr. Daniels, didn't know you were visiting today? Surprise inspection, Daniels said with a faint smile. Let's see how things are running. The workers exchanged glances. Ethan puffed his chest, eager to impress. Hours into the shift, Ethan found his moment. He spotted Jamal carrying equipment and smirked. Carter, come here, Daniels should see what kind of talent we've got on the ground. Jamal paused, already sensing the trap. Still he approached. Ethan gestured at a complicated tool, the laser leveler. Show Mr. Daniels how you use this. I want to be sure you understand precision. Jamal's hands tightened around the handle. He knew the machine. He'd set it up dozens of times. Carefully, he aligned the device, adjusted the lens, and locked it in place. The beam shone red, dead-on accurate. Daniels nodded, impressed. Looks correct, Ethan chuckled. Beginner's luck. Let's see him do the calculations. He shoved a clipboard into Jamal's chest, filled with measurements and slope adjustments. Jamal studied it, lips pressed tight. Numbers swam before him, not because he didn't know them, but because of the eyes on him, the laughter waiting. Slowly, he worked through the math, pen scratching the paper. When he finished, he handed it back. Slope is 3%. Daniels scanned it, nodded. That's correct. Ethan's smile faltered for an instant, then returned sharper. Sure, but notice how long it took him? A real engineer wouldn't take that long. The engineers behind him laughed on cue. Jamal stood silent, fists curling at his sides. Daniels glanced at Ethan. His brows knit briefly as if he sensed the cruelty in the air. For a moment, hope flickered. Maybe this was the moment someone would finally say enough. But Daniels only adjusted his clipboard and cleared his throat. Let's stay focused on efficiency. Carry on. Ethan smirked, emboldened. Of course. Carter, grab those concrete bags and move them to the south side. Alone. Let's test your endurance. The crew's silence deepened. Jamal swallowed the fire burning his chest. Yes, sir. He lifted the heavy sacks one after another while Ethan and his crew snickered. Daniels turned away, retreating to his trailer. He had seen enough, but he chose not to see it all. At lunch break, whispers spread like infection. He saw it. Daniels saw everything. Yeah, and did nothing. Man like him won't risk his neck. He's got a career to protect. Jamal sat apart, chewing his sandwich without tasting it. His eyes were fixed on the ground, jaw tight. Luis slipped beside him. You saw him watching, Luis muttered. Jamal nodded. He could have stopped it. One word. That's all it would have taken. And he didn't, Luis said flatly. Jamal's voice was low, steady, but filled with quiet fury. That makes him worse than Ethan, Luis frowned. Worse? Yes. Jamal's eyes lifted, burning. Ethan's a wolf. You expect him to attack. But Daniels, he wears a suit, pretends he's above it. He saw a man torn apart and walked away. That's not leadership. That's cowardice dressed in authority. Luis had no answer. He simply nodded, the truth too bitter to deny. By the end of the shift, Jamal's body ached from carrying more than his share, but his mind burned hotter. As the sun dipped low, painting the cranes in golden shadow, he stood at the edge of the site and watched Daniels climb into his car. Their eyes met for the briefest second through the tinted glass. Jamal held his gaze. Daniels looked away. That was the moment Jamal understood the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was meant to, and he could no longer stay silent. The midday sun hammered down on the site, baking the steel and concrete until the air shimmered with heat. Workers moved sluggishly, sweat streaking their faces. Yet Ethan's energy burned high, sharpened by cruelty. He clapped his hands loudly. All right, Carter. Time for you to prove yourself again. Jamal straightened slowly, already sensing the trap. His back ached. His palms were raw, but his eyes stayed calm. Ethan pointed to a stack of scaffolding beams leaning against the trench. See those? I want them moved across the pit, alone, no cranes. Just you. Murmurs rippled through the crew. The beams were long, heavy, and awkward, unsafe for a single man. Everyone knew it. Jamal's jaw clenched. That's not safe, sir. Ethan grinned, loud enough for all to hear. Not safe? Or not strong enough? The engineers snickered. One muttered, Bet he's scared. Jamal inhaled deeply, voice steady. It's unsafe. It's a two-man job minimum. Ethan's smirk froze, then sharpened. Are you refusing an order, Carter? The crew froze too. The air thickened. No one moved, no one spoke. Jamal met his eyes, unblinking. I'm refusing to risk my life for your joke, gasps echoed. A nail dropped from someone's hand and clattered against concrete. Ethan stepped forward, face darkening. Careful how you talk to me. Jamal's voice didn't rise, but it carried. Careful how you treat a man. The silence deepened. Workers exchanged glances, some nodding almost imperceptibly. Ethan laughed suddenly, but the sound was brittle. Listen to him. Thinks he's some kind of hero. You're nothing, Carter. Nothing but a... He stopped short, the slur dying on his tongue, swallowed by the eyes of the crew. Jamal's chest rose and fell slowly. Say it, he said quietly. Ethan blinked. What? Say what you were about to call me. Say it in front of everyone. The crew held their breath. The air was electric, charged as if lightning hovered just above their heads. Ethan's jaw worked, but no words came. For the first time, he was cornered. Jamal stepped closer, voice calm but cutting. You humiliate me. You laugh at me. You think silence makes you strong, but silence is just fear, and fear is what I see in your eyes right now. The words struck harder than fists. The men around shifted, some nodding, some staring wide-eyed. Ethan's face flushed red. You think you can talk back to me? I run this site. Jamal's eyes didn't waver. You run nothing. Without us, you're just a man with a clipboard. The silence shattered into murmurs, low, rising, swelling like a tide. Man's right, someone whispered. Finally said it. Another breathed. Ethan's eyes darted around, realizing the crowd was no longer laughing with him. Their silence had turned not into fear, but into witness. He barked, desperate. Back to work. All of you, now! No one moved. Jamal's voice carried over the stillness. I won't carry your beams. I won't play your games. I'm done being your entertainment. For the first time since the beginning, Jamal turned his back on Ethan. He walked toward the crew, toward the trench, his steps slow but unshakable. The men parted for him, silent respect in their eyes. Ethan's voice cracked, raw with fury. "You're finished, Carter. You hear me? Finished." Jamal didn't look back. His reply was calm, heavy as stone. "You've already finished yourself." The rest of the shift dragged on in uneasy silence. Ethan barked orders, but his voice carried less weight. Men obeyed, but their eyes no longer held fear. Only calculation, only thought. Something had changed, and everyone knew the storm was coming. The site felt different the next morning. The machines roared, the sun blazed, but underneath the noise lingered an unsettling hush. Workers moved in clusters, glancing toward Ethan and his engineers with eyes that no longer carried fear. Whispers had spread, about the beams, about Jamal's refusal, about Ethan's words that nearly crossed into something darker. Silence no longer shielded the engineers. It exposed them. Ethan stormed onto the gravel path, barking orders. "Let's move!" "Work doesn't wait for gossip." No one answered. Boots shuffled, steel clanged, but the voices were muted, cautious. He noticed it. Noticed the way men looked at him, then quickly away as if he were already a shadow. Later, in the trailer office, Ethan slammed a folder shut. "We can't let this Carter nonsense grow. He embarrassed me in front of everyone." One of the younger engineers spoke carefully. "They saw you push him. They saw you try to make him do something unsafe." Ethan's glare could have burned holes. "And he disobeyed a direct order? That's insubordination, grounds for termination." "But," the engineer hesitated, lowering his voice, "if he files a report." Ethan cut him off with a fist on the table. "He won't, he's just a laborer. No one will take his word over mine." The room was silent, but silence no longer meant agreement. On site, Jamal worked quietly. His movement steady, his posture strong. Men drifted closer to him, not overtly, but enough to show they had taken sides. One, a wiry welder with a scar across his cheek, whispered as they bent over rebar. "You stood up yesterday. About time someone did." Jamal didn't look at him. "It's not about standing up. It's about not kneeling." The welder nodded, understanding. Another worker joined in softly. "He's losing his grip, you know." We all saw it. Jamal finally looked at them, his gaze steady. "Then you know what's coming. Don't let him drag you down with him." The men exchanged glances. A quiet pact formed in the dust and heat, unspoken but firm. By afternoon, Ethan tried again. He called the crew together, his voice carrying forced authority. "Listen up. I don't care about rumors. What happened yesterday stays buried. Carter's insubordination ends here. Anyone spreading lies will answer to me." The crew stood, arms crossed, faces expressionless. Jamal raised his head slowly. His voice was calm. Not loud, but it carried like thunder. "Truth isn't a rumor." A ripple passed through the group. A few heads nodded. Ethan's face reddened. "You dare!" One of the foremen, usually silent, stepped forward. "He's right, Ethan. You nearly pushed him to injury." "That's not leadership." Gasps broke the air. It was the first open defiance from someone in rank. Ethan's jaw tightened, eyes darting between the men. "Careful, John. Don't forget who signs your paycheck." John's gaze didn't falter. "And don't forget who does the work that makes you money." The crowd hummed. A current of resistance sparked alive. Back in the office, the engineers argued among themselves. "We're losing them," one muttered. "They're just workers," Ethan snapped. "They'll fall back in line." But even his allies shifted uneasily. The cracks were widening. That evening, as the sun sank low and painted the site in blood-red light, Jamal walked slowly across the gravel. Men followed him, not in a march, not in defiance, but in quiet solidarity. They didn't cheer. They didn't chant. They simply walked with him, their silence heavier than steel. Ethan watched from the trailer window, fists clenched so tight his knuckles bled white. For the first time, he realized something chilling. He was outnumbered. He was out of control, and his lies were collapsing around him. That night, phones buzzed. Stories spread beyond the site. Friends told friends, families whispered. By dawn, it would no longer be confined to gravel and dust. The fall had begun. The following morning, the site hummed with tension unlike any before. A fleet of company vehicles arrived, HR representatives stepping out with crisp suits and clipboards. Ethan froze when he saw them, a cold wave of dread crawling over his spine. His smirk faltered, replaced with something tighter, defensive. "Mr. Brooks," a woman in glasses began, her voice calm but carrying authority. "We've received reports of misconduct on this site. We need to speak with you and your team immediately." The engineers exchanged nervous glances. For the first time, no one laughed. Jamal continued his work, gloves coated in concrete dust. He didn't look up. The storm inside him had settled into a steady, controlled burn. He didn't need to watch. He had seen this coming. In the trailer office, HR laid out the evidence. Multiple complaints from laborers, the report of unsafe work conditions, and detailed witness statements. Screens displayed photos and videos taken secretly by workers. Ethan's face paled. This is ridiculous." Ethan snapped, voice trembling. "They're lying. He's exaggerating." Jamal, standing in the doorway, spoke softly but with sharp authority. "You pushed me into danger. You humiliated me. The witnesses are all here. And yes, they are telling the truth." The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. One of the younger engineers whispered, almost to himself, We all saw it." Every word, Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "You'll regret this. Every one of you." The HR manager raised an eyebrow. "Actions have consequences, Mr. Brooks. You will be suspended effective immediately. Your team will be investigated. Any attempts to intimidate witnesses will result in termination." The color drained from his face. The walls of arrogance that had always surrounded him were crumbling. Outside, the laborers gathered, their eyes flicking between Jamal and the engineers. Luis approached him quietly. "Looks like the scales are tipping," Jamal nodded. "Justice isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It just needs to be certain." Across the site, the engineers were being escorted out, heads down, faces flushed with shame. Some tried to speak, but no one listened. Their power, built on fear and silence, had evaporated. One of Ethan's colleagues, pale and shaking, muttered, "I never thought it would end like this." Ethan spat on the ground, fury barely contained. "You'll see." "This isn't over." A worker nearby, arms crossed, replied calmly, "It's over the moment you stopped being honest." Jamal watched quietly. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders like smoke. The injustice had been met with truth. The HR manager handed him a small envelope. "This is your formal acknowledgement. We're committed to safe and respectful work environments. Any retaliation will be met with immediate action." Jamal nodded. "Thank you." Luis grinned faintly. "Feels good, huh?" Jamal shook his head, still focused. "Feels right. That's different." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over steel beams and concrete blocks, Jamal walked across the site. Workers moved aside, letting him pass, a silent parade of respect. Ethan and the rest of the engineers were gone, their arrogance replaced by silence. Their whispers, their mockery, their control, all of it dissolved in the face of truth and witness. Jamal paused at the edge of the trench, looking at the horizon where cranes stood tall, yet powerless without the hands that guided them. Luis stood beside him. "So now what?" Jamal inhaled, feeling the evening breeze brush across his face. "Now we work. Now we rebuild. And now no one ever forgets that standing up isn't weakness, it's survival." The workers returned to their tasks, but something had shifted. The air carried a new weight, one of respect, justice, and undeniable truth. Above them, the sun sank behind the cranes, painting the sky with streaks of fire and gold. Jamal's shadow stretched long across the gravel. He walked forward, head held high, leaving behind the ruins of arrogance, cruelty, and fear. The site would never forget this day. Weeks had passed since the engineers' downfall, yet the dust of the site still clung to boots, uniforms, and memories. Machines hummed steadily in the morning light, cranes swinging like silent sentinels over the concrete skeletons of buildings. Jamal arrived before dawn, carrying his lunch in one hand, a notebook in the other. He had resumed his work, but something inside him had shifted. He moved with quiet confidence, each step deliberate, each motion precise. Luis approached him near the tool shed. "People are still talking about you," he said softly, leaning against a stack of rebar. Jamal glanced at him, expression calm. "I didn't do anything spectacular, I just refused to be silent," Luis smiled faintly. "Still, some of them say it changed everything. Even the quiet ones. You made them realize Fear isn't stronger than truth, Jamal nodded. He surveyed the site, the men bending over steel, lifting beams, aligning scaffolding, all working in an atmosphere subtly altered. There was less tension, more respect. Not everyone spoke, not everyone smiled, but a quiet dignity had returned. He walked to the edge of the trench, looking at the sun rising behind the cranes. Its light reflected off the steel, creating shards of gold in the dust. He thought about the engineers, their arrogance reduced to whispers, their threats impotent. But he also thought of Daniels, who had looked away, and of the countless silent bystanders who had feared speaking. "I wonder," Louise said, "if they'll ever change?" Jamal looked at him. "Maybe, maybe not. But at least now they know someone won't bend. And maybe, that's enough." The words settled between them like a promise. Jamal opened his notebook, jotting down measurements for the day's work. Numbers and notes filled the pages, each line a quiet testament to skill, endurance, and integrity. He wasn't seeking recognition, he didn't need it, but the record was there, a proof of effort, resilience, and survival. As he worked, younger laborers paused briefly to watch him, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Some dared to speak a word of encouragement, others simply nodded. The lessons had passed quietly from witness to witness. Courage can be subtle, dignity persistent, and truth unstoppable. By midday, the sun was high, shadows sharp against the gravel. Jamal paused, wiping his brow, and looked at the skyline beyond the cranes. The buildings were far from finished, but they rose anyway, steady, resilient, like him. Luis leaned on a nearby beam, a faint grin on his face. "You think anyone else will stand up if they have to?" Jamal considered this, the weight of the past weeks pressing gently on his shoulders. "Some will," he said slowly. "Not all, not yet, but enough. Enough to make the silence harder than speaking." The wind picked up, carrying dust across the site. Jamal inhaled deeply, savoring the grit, the work, and the quiet victory that didn't need celebration. He picked up his tools and resumed, each motion precise, deliberate, and unyielding. Around him, the crew worked silently, aware that things had changed. The echoes of arrogance had faded. In their place lingered something stronger: respect, truth, and the indelible mark of a man who refused to be broken. And in that dust under the endless sky, Jamal walked forward. Not as a hero, not as a victor, but as a man who had reclaimed his dignity, leaving behind the shadow of injustice, one measured step at a time.